I am Miss Andrea. And
I am Miss Mayor.
And
we are
CheesePress.
CheesePress Publishing.
So our goal this summer is to stream a lot and to talk about curriculum and education a lot. So don't get sick of us. But this is a good opportunity for you to ask any questions you might have about what we do.
Right.
So what we do is
not stream.
For real though.
We're learning that. New skills. We write books, right, and we write curriculum, and largely about history, but other things too. It's been a couple months since we filmed. Can you tell? Mm-hmm. So, our history books are written for middle and high school students. Mm-hmm. The environment in which we use it is homeschool support.
Right.
They are actually great for everyone. They are excellent primers, especially for adults that feel like they didn't get a great history education. And I want to maybe silence that. No, that's our Wi-Fi. We want to keep that. Here we go. So now maybe we won't hear any more random things behind us.
But can they hear us now?
It's okay. That's still doing the thing. Learning all of the new technologies. Great. So our history books can also be good for adults who don't feel like they've got the best history education.
Right.
You know, maybe you're going through this wild world that we're in and feel like maybe you missed some things along the way. Maybe your history class was penmanship as you copied it out of the history book and you didn't actually absorb any of that information.
That happened.
There are things that happened in teaching history. One of my favorite memes going around is, we're in this position because you were all taught history by the football coach.
So, interestingly, when we first started dipping our toes into being homeschool educators, not homeschooling parents, because we already were that.
Yeah, we were both already homeschool parents.
Right. But when we decided to be homeschool educators, right, I was surrounded by a bunch of my children's friends who had also been homeschooled now.
And graduated. We're talking young adults at this point.
Right. They were in their 20s. I'm going to pop my cover a little bit and say my kids did not have an issue with history because I learned to love it. And I think that's kind of where the key is. But in speaking to my children's friends, you'd make a historical reference and they would look at you extremely blankly. And these people were also homeschooled. Or they just had a very narrow view of some historical event that never gave them the full picture. One young person I spoke to in particular, when I told them that I was considering starting a homeschool program, they made me sit and they said, so you have to do this right. And I'm like, and whatever do you mean? And they said, well, my mom wasn't good at history, so she sent me to this church program for history, and we just watched clips of a very angry man named, his name is Jones. It was all propaganda, and they called it history.
It was mostly prepper material, right?
He was very popular. He would just like Tasmanian devil spin out over topics. I see his face. I can't think of his name.
Gotcha.
When I make this video,
when I publish
this video,
you'll go find that
as a video on our channel. I'll drop the name or an image in. And he said, with that in mind, my mother thought I was learning history, and I was learning a very narrow view of current events. And so they had no real grounding on anything historical, and that has stuck with me.
So also understand that in a case like that, whoever was teaching that class had to have known that they weren't teaching history.
They didn't know what they were doing.
However,
they were teaching social studies orally.
Right. However, when you're talking about even the best intentioned history classes, most college acceptance, because the program that we run is focused on college prep, so we are asking students to complete courses that we know that colleges are looking for on the transcript in order to accept students. Because when you're homeschooled, you can chart your own path in education. And so if you're not super interested in one subject, you take just enough of that. If you're super interested in the subject over here, you might take 6 or 7 courses in that. And that's not uncommon. So if
It's
history,
actually good.
and that's actually good. It makes for a fantastic education, especially through high school education, if you can lean into things that people are passionate about. However, that means that a lot of times students might get no more than 2 years of a social studies because the colleges are looking for 2 years of social studies.
That you're not going to understand anything.
The history of the world does not fit in 1 or 2 classes, y'all.
It's not possible.
We teach on the classical model, which is a 4-year cycle of world history. You teach the ancient period, medieval, early modern, and modern. She thinks it should be a 6-year cycle.
I do.
There's enough material, it could be, but you can't look at a high school student and say you're going to be in school for 6 years.
Starting in middle school. So I was on Reddit because that's a hole to fall down, right? Looking at homeschool questions. And somebody was asking if they had done enough, considering that the child was ADHD and they were more interested in teaching the child what they were interested in than having them know the facts of a 100-year-old war. I get it. They need to know the reasons behind the 100-year-old war.
And this kind of feeds into how world history gets taught, which is something that we have constantly commentated on because it's not doing a service to the people who are learning it. It's not conveying the subject with any kind of or context.
That was driving me insane.
I had ignored it successfully until you started messing with it.
It was a floor plan that was pretty.
I see. Things on our computer. This is what happens when you let us drive the ship, and there's nothing good about this. So, when you condense things down, when you take history from the wide breadth of material that you have to cover and you condense it down, what you lose are the connecting threads for why different things happen. And so you wind up with the whole kind of meme movement of nobody knows why this happened. No, sir, people who study history know why it happened. It's not a mystery.
Stonehenge.
These things are not mysterious when
what
you
aliens brought us these rocks. Clock.
Anyway, when you do condense history down, you're stuck trying to hit on the most important highlights, and you lose the context for how we got there. Context is kind of important. There are ways to condense history down by focusing on a handful of these threads, and you could actually get a reasonable history education if you drill down into specific parts.
If I am faced with a junior who hasn't touched history,
Right.
and they're trying to get into Georgia State, I know what to teach them.
Right. Start with American history because American colleges expect to see American history on your transcript. That can be taught in 1 year because America's a relatively young country.
Right.
Now, you lose some of how we got here, but more or less you can cover 1776 to the point at which we're no longer redacting names.
2000, at this point, 5.
Thereabouts-ish. I would still say early 90s. You can cover a lot of that in the span of 1 year and understand enough of the context to actually get somewhat of a rich historical education.
I can even figure out what to teach them in world history. It would be a smushing of early modern.
But then you're missing so much if you smush
I've only
early
got
modern
2
and modern.
years.
Understood. The way I would approach it is, okay, we have to pare it down. Let's look at the historical factors in modern conflicts. And so we're going to do a unit study on whether that's the Middle East or Russia or
How did we get here? What
how did
in
we get
history?
here? And you trace those threads from the ancient times.
Now we have to write
all the
another
way
book,
through.
Mare.
Now we have to write
Thanks.
another book. You're welcome. It was over here percolating in my brain as we were talking. This is how
If
we
you
decide what to
knew
write.
How many things?
Okay, I need to make a note of that.
We need to write because that was good.
World History Unit Studies.
How did we get here? Oh my word.
World History Unit Studies. I'm literally making a note of this because I will forget it if I don't. Modern conflicts. How did we get here? Well, maybe that will be the video series that I do next. Okay, because we don't have enough to do this summer. It's fine.
Twitch. I promised my husband I would go on vacation.
Oh no! When are we doing that?
Apparently, we're all going.
Oh, that's different.
Write.
No, that's
vacation.
different. We're calling that a vacation. We're locking ourselves in a cabin to write. That's not the same thing.
Okay, so finish your thought, because we have a really good segue right now.
We do. We have an excellent segue. So, for instance, if we were doing the Middle East, right now there's a huge conflict between Israel, Palestinians, Gaza Strip, and you hear often in the media that this land was always Israel's, and there's no such thing as a Palestinian state, and that's a manufacture the various Arab nations in the Middle East circa 1970 something. That's not the conflict over that particular piece of land dates back to the fall of the Bronze Era and the Bronze Age, and so when the Sea Peoples are attacking everybody and you have these major civilizations collapsing, what the people that the Greeks called the Philistines, which you might recognize if you've read a Bible, had colonized Israelites. The Israelites fought a war of independence. They, it out from under that, and then the two cultures lived side by side long enough for the Greeks to write about them on that piece of land where the Philistines occupied what is now the Gaza Strip. So you start all the way back, as far back as you can get, and then you trace that line into the modern era to understand how these conflicts are happening because of a super old grudge during colonization in the Bronze Age. That we're still living.
And my goodness, so we're looking at 500 BCE?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've been at it. Mm-hmm. We've been at it for a minute. Mm-hmm.
These are, and when you start talking about current events and modern diplomacy, really old intergenerational trauma is really hard to work out. So that complicates things, and if you only know part of the story, you certainly can't wrap your head around.
What makes me sad is that every generation, the young people try to work through it.
Yeah.
And the old people throw them back in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, speaking of things that we just found ourselves writing, I was going back to the beginning, but yes, okay.
This is the thing we just found ourselves writing.
Yeah.
So this is how we work. We get an idea, we get a wild hair, as it were, and we start writing things, and sometimes they get published and sometimes they don't. We were just at a conference about, a month ago?
Yes.
About a month ago.
About a month now.
And we set up a table to, this was a kind of business to conference. It was the Micro Schools Association's, like, hybrid schools. Their annual conference. And so everybody there runs a program similar to what we do, or they work in governmental policy around these issues, or it's a collective, not so much of like homeschooling families, people who are looking to change the face of education and where we are.
Right.
And so we had a table set up with all of our various things that we've written and published, just to kind of see what we're attracted to. Unfortunately, the answer was everything.
Fortunately, a few years ago, 2 summers ago, I got an attitude. I caught attitude, because some of these books come out of me catching an attitude. And someone had asked for the umpteenth time how to homeschool kindergarten.
No, they asked, what curriculum do I need for my kindergartner?
So when I finished rolling my eyes to the point that I probably gave myself a headache, we created this. And we shopped it around to some friends. And they were like, have this, do this. So we got a really good idea, and we did this, and we wrote the next few years, because this is kindergarten homeschool portfolio. We wrote first, second, third, and I believe fourth. But then didn't publish anything but kindergarten, because we just felt like
it didn't have much traction. We weren't getting, orders for it. So we were like, maybe this is just the wild hair that we found interesting, and there just really isn't a need for this out on the market until we got to the conference, and this is what drew everybody to the table.
And so this is not a homeschool curriculum per se. What's the word I use? I call it a
portfolio book.
I call it spine.
Yeah.
And I say that something is a spine. It has that the child needs to learn that year.
It's a journal with milestones. That's literally what we call it.
It's up to the parent to teach and resource and make it more fun, and more personal and things of that nature. And so what this book does is it doesn't teach the alphabet, but it's somewhere for you to record the alphabet once they know it. It doesn't teach them to count to whatever, but it's somewhere to record that when they know it. There's nature in it. There's in it poems in it. Have you read this? Have you read that? Have you read this together?
There's a discovering colors and making art.
And so it's in the portfolio. So, you don't teach your kindergartner, all this is in there. You don't have to do it in order. Just, you're like, oh, we did this thing today. Let me flip through here. Oh, here's a page for this. Let me go ahead and record.
And you don't have to complete every single thing.
No.
There's a page in here for sports activities. If your child is not into sports, then you're not going to complete the sports activity page.
You could take a picture of them hitting a wiffle ball and then put it in, but that's performative.
Or climbing
right?
a tree.
That's right.
Or climbing a tree.
Right.
Because your definition of sports might be different than somebody else's.
So it's meant to be very personal, and it's meant to be that thing that you save and put in the box, to say that the kindergarten year, instead of a whole file box for kindergarten year, you've compiled everything into here and you have it. And
there's tons of places for field trips. So, because when you're teaching a kindergartner, your vast amount of your education is going to be come along with me and experience life. And we're going to talk
about
a field
trip might be
grocery store. It might be to the park where we talk about all of the birds that we hear and all of the flowers that we see.
It might be to the anesthesia museum. I remember taking my kids there. Yeah. Many neat things. And you could record them and keep this as a scrapbook for your kids. And so we're at conference and we had this. We're like, oh, let's bring it. Everybody was like, that. Can you personalize this for our homeschool program? And looked at each other and we're like,
yeah. So I guess we have to lay out the other ones that we've
need
written.
To lay out the other ones and then put the customization pages into our website so people can
make those selections and we can print what they need.
Because in addition to what's in this book, we have some custom pages also for like kids who do theater, kids who do this, kids who do that. So you can literally order our book and have it customized to your name.
And so apparently we're laying out the rest of the elementary series because that's what everybody asks.
Immediately. But it creates a really unschooling atmosphere, but having the book on hand as a spine makes you go, oh, we're not doing anything today, let's try this.
Right.
Here's this thing. And so you'll end up less holes.
Well, and parents who are like, I don't know what my child's expected to know by the end of kindergarten or first grade or whatever else. So all of those milestones are in there.
Yeah.
So that, an app that maybe has never taught a classroom of kindergartners, doesn't know what standards look like for that age group. Well, here you go. You have the basic 3-letter spelling words, you have the books that you should be reading, you have the counting, all of that stuff that, generally speaking, we've agreed as a society is this is what kindergarten.
If yourself during pregnancy with what to expect when you're expecting, and then what to expect to year 1 through year whatever, it's kind of written frame, way less scary. Just like age-appropriate milestones, age-appropriate reading material, things of that nature. Yeah. And so, homeschool, kindergarten portfolio, of which there will also be grades 1 through at least 4, maybe 5.
I was going to say, I think we had 5 planned.
Yeah. And
it's our belief that elementary is more about experiencing the world and learning from everyday activities. I mean,
multiplication and fractions in there.
Yeah, you want to do your math, you want to do your reading. But beyond that, learn about the rest of it through whatever the child's interested in. When you get to middle school, you need to start kind of thinking, completing college professors are going to expect assignments to be completed.
Yeah.
So we need to start developing some discipline and some work ethic about middle school.
Yeah, I see 5th and 6th graders start to teach you what you have taught them. So
and to do it that age, then when they get a little bit older, because when they're a little bit older, they're going to start telling you, I don't need that.
They'll dig in their heels.
Why am I having to do this? That's not something
I've been fancy free and footloose for 13 years. Why do I have to perform like a monkey for you now? No, they're going to do that. So that's why we want to get them 11 and 12 and get them to start.
Routine in place before they become teenagers.
Absolutely.
Every time.
So, with that said, let's go back to the lines of legacy.
So, speaking of wild hares, 2 weeks before the conference, this one said, I had a fever dream and I wrote a book. Okay. This is the book. And now we have a series planned because this is what we do.
Right.
These are lines of legacy. So, as we were talking about drilling down and compressing history, unit study style, into smaller frames, this is one of those tools that you can do that with. And this is teaching history through literature.
The reason I wrote it is because we are through some things as a society, and a lot of educators online were saying this museum closed, the access to this African American information is closed. African American history is kind of being lexicon in a lot of ways, and so I was busy like scrounging in AP African American history, and I have a document set up for that. But in the meanwhile, I was like, African American history that I haven't learned from reading a novel. And so I said, what if I pulled together all the novels and put them in order? There are 86 in there. You don't have time to read 86 novels, but
Novels and plays.
and if you into regions, time periods. And so if you choose a couple from each of those time periods, if you read 10 books, you'll have the full story. Can you see that?
There we go. So it starts with what the Black experience was pre-slavery, before coming to the United States. And so that's that first section. And then, of course, we're going to talk about slavery, and we're going to talk about post-slavery, Reconstruction, civil rights kind of things. And then modern voices. And so each one, so the idea, stepping back to analyzing history based on literature, the goal is to understand the historical context, identify fact versus fiction, comparing narratives to primary and secondary sources, and evaluating how authors use creative license. So, first thing you're going to do is read the literary work actively, and there's steps on how one does that and why. We're going to establish the historical context by researching the time period. We're going to focus on the political structure, social, racial dynamics, economic systems, things like that. Then compare key events with what you read. Detect where creative license was used, what's historically accurate, and what is a narrative device to move the story forward. Evaluate bias and perspective. Even things that are historically accurate are being colored by what by the wrote it.
There are 3 versions of the color purple.
And every narrative has a lens, and then you draw your own conclusions from it. And so those are the things that this book asks you to do of the various collections that are in here. Trying to find what's not necessarily.
And so African American literature is hard. It's a hard read. Thus, the online censors mark it all as mature audiences only.
So we've included those titles, but as you can see here, we've got little flags on either side of the title of the book. That means that there's mature content in it. When we're talking about African American history, a lot of it is mature content.
It's all mature content because it's sad at best, often.
Right. Violent,
Yeah.
frequently.
Yeah.
When we have it laid out, as you can see here, this is one of the selections of the stories that we have in here. You've got your title, your author, when it was written, a synopsis of it, and, content warnings for the things you're going to encounter in this story. A recommended age group. This is suitable for, early high school. Maybe this one's middle school. Maybe
There's
this
a
one
few middle
really
schools in
is
there.
kind of adult. And if you want to teach it to your high schooler, please do with supervision. And then there's questions for every book, so you can go back and reflect on what you've read. And, so that's the way that that's set out. Got all of the pieces of literature, all 80-something of them in here. So the first section is all about novels, whether that's a fiction account, whether that's a memoir, they're novels. And then we discuss plays.
If you have a short attention span or a theatrical person, which we're surrounded by all of the above.
Yes.
I highly recommend you go into the play portion. The honorable mention in this book is the Wilson Project. And I just adore it because it teaches you,
You have a whole section
based on
of honorable
one
mentions.
little neighborhood in Philadelphia, it teaches you what the people were going through from the time that slavery ended, when people were afraid of being recaptured, all the way through gentrification. So it takes you in that entire neighborhood's journey over 100 years. And so that's kind of the reason I mention is because that's kind of the theme of the whole book. If you go through and choose a book from each section, for example, I don't know, something on the Igloo people pre-slavery, and then maybe Seven Harriet Tubman and Roots, and then Raisin in the Sun, then I don't know, Memoir by MLK, right? If you read that, you understand on a country level what the people were experiencing. And so then if you do the work that is suggested in the beginning of the book, where you go through and you say, okay, let me find out the historical context, exactly what was going on here. What is truth from fiction? And you analyze that. You've got quite a literature portfolio. You know, you've got a writing portfolio there for your student, right?
Right.
And you've got an understanding of African American history. And that is the purpose of this literature guide that I wrote one night.
And then we had it published, and we did have them on hand by the last day of the conference.
We did.
Which took a little bit of gyrations to actually get them in hand that quickly.
We're currently putting together the women's history version.
So we're going to do this for a number of different kind of history themes. So women's history is next. We're already working on it. And we'll probably do American history, though this isn't necessarily a new idea for American history. There are some out there, so I need to see how ours would be.
Right now, I'm working on just straight American history, the way we do our normal history, because there's someone waiting for it for their homeschool program. So basically, we talked to a lot of people who run homeschool programs, and they were like this and that, and like, oh, no rest this summer. Got it.
Yeah, no, we will not be sleeping. Sleeping, I guess, is for when you're dead. So back to, we kind of started that we began publishing curriculum to begin with.
Right.
Was because when we started our homeschool support program, and the purpose being let's fill holes so that students applying to college have everything that they need to be successful in college. That very first year, we had one senior who did not have an American history credit on his transcript. And so, okay, we're teaching American history.
Also that, and the fact that American history kind of lives itself.
It does kind of live in your... Well, but that was not nearly as much of a consideration because we were not going to teach out of our heads.
No, we were going to teach
We find a book. We were going to find a curriculum, and we were going to teach somebody else's material. We had no intention of writing anything.
The closest thing that I had that I like is History of Us by Joy Hutkin.
Yeah.
But it's written for middle-agers.
Right.
Yeah.
So, with that kind of an inspiration, could not find anything that did what we wanted it to do. We did, in fact, begin writing an American history curriculum. We wanted something that covered the entire story, the happy parts, the successes, the glorious pieces of American history, but also
The oopsies.
errors, the horrible we've done as a country, because there's been
The
some
things
of that.
that we decided we would do because it would help us better monetarily in the short term.
Or because we were pushing ideas that were not what was written in the Constitution.
I don't want to get into the Constitution right now.
So we wanted a history curriculum that did both. That had the celebrations, that had the heartache, that had all of it all put together so that students can have a full understanding of the history. Because when you focus on one or the other, which most history curriculums do, or you water it all down so you're not really focusing on any of it, you're just trying to tell this super neutral story, then you're losing so much of the actual material and the opportunity to analyze and
I mean, some of the ridiculous things that are said in history books under the guise of keeping it simple is ridiculous.
It is.
And so when let me tell you something about kids. They know when you're fit.
They do.
And so once that meter goes off, they're done listening.
Yep.
So if you give them the hard truth and then the redeeming stories, they know that you're skipping things.
Yep.
And they're gonna, and they love a good story. So tell the whole story dynamically.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So that's when we started writing our full year history curriculum. We started with American history. So that we're gonna, I guess, try to publish that this summer. I don't really think we're getting to that, but okay. And then we said world history on a 4-year cycle with the classical model. So we actually have already started publishing the ancient history curriculum because that's what we taught this year. So we are currently
Halfway through. It's all written.
It's almost all written. We're most of the way through laying out book 3.
We got tripped halfway through.
We did.
Someone
So
just
books
put them-
1 and 2 are out there and available.
Mm-hmm.
Book 3 will be out by the end of May. And we've got books 4 through 7 written. We just need to get them laid out.
Right.
So a whole year is actually 8 books. There's 7 of these, which with 4 lessons each, it's 28 lessons over the entire course of the year. And then every single one begins with this, which is an introduction to the study of history. We wrote that first. We asked students to read that week 1 every single year. I don't care how many times you've read it, you're reading it
I
again.
mean, they can take 2 weeks, but they have to have it read before the school year starts.
They have to have it. Why would you take 2 weeks to read this?
Because you're lazy? Because you're a kid?
If you're a high school student,
How many
this,
pages is it?
that's what, 77 pages.
I can read 100 pages in a day.
Yeah, no. This 77 you read in a week. What this book does, and this is one that I very emphatically recommend to anyone that wants to pick up on studying history. Maybe you were one of those kids who tuned out in history because you weren't getting the whole story and you're like, that person doesn't know what they're talking about. And so now you decided later in life you want to come back to history. This is where you start. This is going to walk through why we study history. It guides you through an exercise for why you personally might want to study history. It goes through how we study history. There's a discussion on critical thinking, conflict resolution, communication. That's all why. Once you get by, there's how. Once I hit skip past that. So the study of history. We talk about evaluating historical information, analysis, context, what's some of the terminology that you're going to come across, what are primary sources, what is your hierarchy of sources, what do we trust, verify, what do we take information out of and then try and piece together what's actually true. So there's a lot of that kind of information in here. There's a whole garbage archaeology. It's kind of fascinating. That was just a segue that I wound up in the middle of. So then we talk about how we study history, and we talk about, this basically and apply that to the study of history. We're going to observe something. We're going to ask a question about it. We're going to theorize what the answer to that question might be. We're going to then go research that and see what we can find and analyze what we found. And we're going to draw conclusions based on the material that we've come up with. We cover note skills. So this can be great for a student that's about to go to college, especially if they're from a non-traditional educational environment. So you haven't been in classrooms and had to take notes. There's a discussion about a whole bunch of different kinds of note-taking methods. How do you schedule your schoolwork so that you can get it all done and not miss assignments? So there's a lot of good, interesting information in here. And it sets up the year for our students.
What people have said to me about this book in particular is it's a good book to read before starting any history course.
Yes.
Not just ours.
Yep.
Because because it's to prepare yourself to study it. And it'll succeed. Wow, my tongue is not doing what it wants. Set you for success in that course.
Right.
Yes.
So when our curriculum packages are packaged as a group, then you're going to get one of these and then 7 of whatever it is. So we're going to finish getting ancient history out the door because it's there, it's written, and it's half published, so we need to have the whole thing published. But then also,
We're gonna turn right around.
by the fall, we have to have medieval history out there.
We're teaching medieval next year, and we're not going to be actively teaching medieval while we are writing medieval. No, we will be working on, in the fall, we will be working on early modern. Yeah.
So those are the things that we have to get out the door in the next 3 months. There's so much of it. There will be no sleeping. I mean, thankfully, we have a whole team working on these things. Right now, I'm the only layout person.
You are. I'm so sorry.
It's fine. You're fine.
Because I'm incredibly decisive. Means I'm not nitpicky at all. I'm like, good enough. That leaves her all twitchy. She's got to do it.
Well, so some notes.
I can edit videos.
Right. I'm not touching.
But yeah, she needs
It
to
would
edit.
take 2 weeks to edit a video. There's no reason for me to have any part of that.
It takes me an hour.
But I do all of our layout. So I'm responsible for our cover designs. I'm responsible for our text layout. A couple of that I would like to draw your attention to. When we chose the layout for this book, because specifically I have a child who struggles with dyslexia, so we have chosen fonts and spacing and sizing that is best practices from what we're being told for people who have difficulty reading, whether that's dyslexia, whether that's a low vision. It's not big print.
The fonts are not fancy.
They are very readable fonts. We do try to include images in our material. Largely, I'm going to use public domain images because I try very hard not to infringe on people's copyrights. So I do a great deal of research into making sure that the pictures that we choose are something that you can actually use. We have a couple little features in here. A rabbit trail. This is, we've mentioned that it's actually kind of interesting. If you want to know more about it, go find out. And then we have vocabulary that runs along with the text. So whenever you see a bolded word, you also have it defined over here. Is there anything else that's so is not just a history book. This is history and language arts. What that looks like. For ancient history, that means that we are including literature. So that literature might be creation stories for ancient history. It might be
or something of a more religious bent.
Yeah, so here we are in, this is chapter 2, lesson 2. Yeah, which is and so the creation stories that we have in here, we have the Enuma Elish from Mesopotamia. We have the Hebrew creations from Genesis. We have the Rig Veda from Hindu, the Memphite theology from Egyptian, Pangu and the creation of the world from Chinese, and we have the Poetic Edda from Norse. And then we're also going to kind of lightly cover in ancient. Most people kind of grammar.
It's a spine
by
for
using
grammar.
it.
Yeah. We've never too hard grammar unless we saw a pattern forming. And patterns tend to only form in homonyms.
Right.
And typing too fast.
No, I will say that these students do not care about grammar.
They don't care.
Because the computer does it for them.
Well, right, but they have to take the time to go back through.
And so, editing.
Yeah.
So, ancient is going to have a real high level, here's the stuff you need to know about grammar. When we get to medieval, we're going to start talking about essay types. And so, medieval, early modern, and modern are more focused on writing. So, every single one of the lessons has an accompanying piece of literature that tracks along with that lesson. And then there is some kind of writing element to it. In ancient, your element is largely grammar. In later ones, we're going to talk about essay types. We're going to talk about creative writing. We're going to talk about, how then what you've learned here and put it back out so that people know what you know, or make an argument in essay form. Are we going to just describe something that we have learned? What do those look like? So
that's what we've been.
That's what we've been, and that's what we're doing the rest of the summer.
Yes. We've toyed with the idea of just streaming us working through this.
That may be what we'll end up doing.
Yeah.
Because we're going to try and...
You'll get to know so much about us.
Oh, no. Oh, no. We're going to try and stream twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
We're going to try and have these conversations as we're working through.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we want to talk about in videos is, you know, all of written for middle and high school students. Sometimes we find history things that are very adult.
Right, and so we're
here's
like,
the
I want to
history
talk
that we
about
can't
this
tell
thing
the
we tell.
students.
Yeah, we can't tell the children. So yeah, would live specifically on this kind of
Right,
Twitch
like
live.
that will get here on Twitch. You're
Yeah,
not
you're
going to
not
get
gonna
that on
get that on
YouTube because
YouTube.
the YouTube is also designed to track along with
the curriculum.
what we're doing,
Right.
and it's going to be ultimately when we're done a resource for students to be able to get a video version of the information that's here. Maybe it expands on it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's, you know, how we're, so that if somebody, you know, wants to process, then, you know, they'll be able to video that shows our process.
Right.
Things like that.
Something we haven't about that I'm thinking of, Mayor,
Oh no.
is I'm thinking of doing another GoFund for pre-orders for this, because that would help us employ our writers for the summer
And editors.
and editors, and so if you're interested in pre-ordering Veins of Civilization history, we have a link for you, and you'll have it by August 1st, regardless. Like
Yep.
whether we do the GoFundMe, whether we're going or not, that'll be done by August 1st.
Yep.
But it'll help create a richer environment of learning our curriculum.
Yeah.
Be back on, what day is this?
I was gonna say today's Tuesday.
I think we'll be back on
On
Thursday.
We will have some links
Yeah.
that will go to places that you can purchase the things we've already published, as well as keep you abreast of the progress as we are publishing new things.
Yes.
And we will keep about that throughout the course of the summer. And
This is
See
going to
where
be
this
a
goes.
fun summer. It's going to be
I think so,
history
too.
filled and nerdy. She might get mad at me. I might get mad at her. I get impatient.
I may
but
be
it's gonna
sitting
be
here on
good.
live stream being like, I didn't sleep last night.
Till next
Until
time.
next time.